everyone. My name is Robert Sepulveda, and I am a licensed mental health counselor here at Hinman Counseling Services. Yeah.
And I'm Dr. Brad Hinman. I am also here at Hinman Counseling Services. I am a licensed professional counselor, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm a certified sex therapist.
Great. And so today we're going to talk about sex and religion. Very controversial and big topic for a lot of people. And for me, I've growing up in a religious home, actually Seventh-day Adventist. I'll be honest, I never was talked about sex. No one ever said, hey, this is what happens or this is what you do. And if I ever asked about it or brought something up, it was shut down real quick. Nobody wants to hear about it. I always got the look. If there was a movie on and a sex scene came on, it was, hands over my eyes, or parents would like fast forward, and I always wondered why. What's wrong with that? What's that about? But yeah, I grew up in the church. I was, kind of the kid that was, can I say forced, to sing songs up front in the pulpit, to memorize Bible verses and recite them, made to sing in the choir. And, that's all I knew for a long time. And it wasn't till grade school till I started to learn more about this, not even from my own family, about what sex was. So, Brad, what was your experience growing up?
I had a very similar experience to yours. I did not grow up Seventh-day Adventist, but my experiences around sex growing up were very similar to yours. Sex was not discussed in my home at all. I have 5 brothers and 1 sister, but my sister left home when I was like 6 because she's the second oldest. And so it was all men, basically, and my mom. I remember, a girl would get pregnant and my mom would not use the word pregnant because that meant they had sex. And so it's very similar to what you said. Like if we had questions growing up, those were shut down very quickly. So I quickly learned in my family that my parents were not safe to ask questions about sex to. So what I learned about sex was from school, from my friends, right? And so it was a very taboo topic. I grew up in a very small town. Everybody knew everybody. And so you had to be careful even like what you disclosed to people because it would just go throughout the whole town, right? So it was a very, very not open sexual environment at all.
Wow, and I hear you on that part about school, because I didn't get that, education about sex at home. It was all at school, and I'll be honest, it wasn't exactly the greatest place to learn because right. I learned it from my peers and as early as 2nd, 3rd grade, and I just remember too thinking back, like people would in the playground, kids would play these silly games of like and ask you questions like, oh, are you a virgin? Are you a virgin? Oh, and then like if you said yes, then it was like, ew, oh, you had sex. But then if you said no, you were lame. Yeah. You were made fun of. But it's like, I don't even know what that means, and just kind of being the odd one out. But, as an adult, it's okay. Everybody was lying, right. And just playing around back then. And things like that, kids would make silly jokes. And like, I remember once too, my whole life, well, not my whole life, but I thought a condom was like a vitamin, like a pill that you put inside your penis, right? And that was, again, totally ignorant. But again, at like, 2nd and 3rd grade, kids, my age are talking about these things. And that, that sparks that curiosity and you want to learn more. But then if I go ask, I can get in trouble if I ask at home. Or even a teacher would be like, "Oh, don't talk about that stuff." But yeah, how was it for you?
Similar, right? Like it's very restrictive environment. I remember being too embarrassed to ask, certainly my brothers, because I have five older brothers. Um, and so, they'd be going out on a date, but they would take a shower before their date. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like, you already took a shower. Why are you taking another shower? And so just as a child, like not knowing the physical part of like dating and love relationships, right? The sexual part. And I already said like I couldn't ask my parents any questions, and I felt too embarrassed to ask my brothers questions because they already knew what they were doing, right? But and so I didn't want to be ridiculed for that. And so there really wasn't anybody to ask questions to. I just had to go through life like picking up little tidbits here and there, from people's conversations, and learning, oh, well, this is what that means. This is what happens. And so, yeah, it was, I just remember that it was almost like putting a puzzle together, right? Like just gathering pieces of information here and there, going through life.
So Brad, what are some myths that you've heard about like sex, and I guess religion too, and how those two may be intertwined?
Yeah, probably the biggest sex myth that I hear now in my practice is like men think that teenage boys will think that they're sinning if they have a wet dream. And so because they think, well, I'm being sexual while I'm sleeping, and so obviously if I'm not married, then that's a sin, right? And so I have to talk to them about, production of sperm, and the release of that sperm is a natural biological process, just like urinating, right? So that you're not sinning, you're not dreaming about being sexual necessarily, although that's fine too. But so that's a myth. I remember hearing growing up that if women used a public bathroom and they sat on the toilet seat, that they could get pregnant from that. So that's another myth. Yeah, so there's another myth that I heard growing up as a kid, kind of a weird opposite kind of a myth, is that girls don't get pregnant the first time they have sex, like that it's impossible to get pregnant the first time. Yeah. So that's a dangerous myth. Yeah. Because they can. So what about you? Have you heard myths?
I growing up in the church too. I think I remember in Pathfinders, right? It's like Boy Scouts for Seventh-day Adventists, right? I remember being told that if you play with your penis or if you masturbate, you're gonna go bald. You're gonna lose all your hair. And if there were kids with like bald spots, you think, you'd kind of whisper like, oh, they're jerking off all the time, or they're always masturbating, or and like it's sad, but also I think it also kept some boys from masturbating. Mm-hmm. I think it scared them into it. Some other things that I've experienced too in practice is again, I remember having like a teen just saying that they feel so guilty because they masturbated and they're already cheating on their future wife, and they feel guilty to the point where they feel like they have to be baptized like again, or several times, or continuously like just overwhelmed with guilt and shame because like, they masturbated this day, and they got to spend the whole day praying and asking for forgiveness. Yeah, that's some sad things that I've heard about that. And I'm sure there's other myths. I guess another one that I could think of is like, you don't got to worry about how sex is going to be after marriage. It's going to be, it's going to be just right because God, chose you and you two were married together. So sex is going to be perfect from moving on from here on out. If you marry the right person, the sex is going to be good, no matter what. But, a lot of times I've found in practice too that it's not necessarily true. You know, a lot of people are disappointed because they start to learn about each other and realize that they may not have the same like desire or you know, motivation or whatever it is to want to have sex as many times as the other person. But yeah.
Yeah, you're bringing up a good point, because some things that I've heard too in session is, they, especially in Christian families, sex is viewed as wrong and it's taboo, right? Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And then the day you get married, all that is supposed to evaporate. Yeah. And now you're supposed to have this wonderful, glorious sex, and you're supposed to know everything about sex, and you're supposed to know how to please your partner. And all of that is just supposed to be like delivered to you from an angel or something, because it wasn't talked about at home, right? So nobody has ever taught how to have good sex at home. Nobody's ever taught how to ask for sex or turn down sex, but all that is just supposed to miraculously show up on your wedding night. And so that can lead to problems because those taboos don't evaporate overnight. And so sometimes we'll get newly married clients or newly partnered clients in this practice, and they literally don't know how to have sex, right? They don't know how to negotiate for sex. They don't know how to ask for sex because they've never been trained how to do that. And they weren't able to ask questions growing up. And so it can lead to a lot of hang-ups, even in relationships where it's legal to have sex now, but they've spent 90% of their life thus far with sex being forbidden and taboo. And so and that leads me to another thought of, like, a lot of times single guys, they'll be looking at porn when they're single, and they'll say, when I get married, I'm going to stop looking at porn. And they've trained their brain to continually look at porn, and that doesn't evaporate on your wedding night either, right? And so they may want to have sex with their wife, and they may desire their wife, but they've trained their brain that this is the way that I get sexual gratification, is through pornography. And it's not like a light switch. Your brain just can't shut that off overnight. And so, like, I'll a lot of times say to clients, you're practicing doing it wrong.
Another, I guess another myth to add to that, I've actually had a client tell me too, that, they can't masturbate because they're married. And if they do, they're cheating on their husband, or their wife. And that's also a sin, and it's just, I don't know, I guess it's kind of sad, because it's like, no matter what you do, you're sinning. If the other person maybe doesn't feel like having sex, or isn't, it really is tired and not in the mood, it's a sin if you decide to masturbate. Just growing up or in the church, masturbation is considered shameful, and wrong. And a lot of people really do believe that they are going to go to hell if they masturbate. To the point where, some clients I've worked with have even, considered suicide or thought about it, because, that what's the point? Like, if I can't have sex and if I can't, masturbate, but I can't help it, right? I can't stop myself, or maybe there's, some sort of, like, I guess, pornography addiction. They feel like, what's the point? I'm even working on this, or I've been trying to change, but I can't. Then there's no other, they feel like there's no other choice. That, what's the point of being alive if they can't even do that?
Mm-hmm. So talking about the shame and guilt and stuff, I get a lot of clients that have a lot of shame and guilt around if they're trying to recover, like if they're trying to give up masturbation and porn, or they're trying to give up like hooking up with random sexual strangers, if they mess up and they choose to use, they think they're starting over, right? There's that huge sense of hopelessness and shame and guilt from that if they're moving forward in a trajectory towards health, then they think if they make one mistake they're back at zero now. And I'm like, no, you can't unlearn what you've learned. You still know that. You just chose not to use it one day. right? Which is not the end of the world. So you just have to choose to continue to use the new knowledge that you have about recovery. And so that's resulted in a lot of shame and guilt in my clients, is this idea of I have to be perfect. Even in my recovery, I have to be perfect.
Wow.
Like the second that I walk through the door of the counseling practice is the last time that I will ever use, and it's the last time I'm ever going to think about using, and it's the last time that I'm ever going to feel shame and guilt, right? And then when they use, they mess up, they choose to use, then that creates, it all comes flooding back. And I've had clients talk about suicide in that regard as well, right? That I'm never going to get better. God can't even forgive me. I'm so bad, right? Like I'm so horrible that God can't do anything with me. And that's a really hopeless situation, a really hopeless position to be in, because they can be taught the tools. They can, like, our brains are super malleable, and our brains adjust quickly to new information and new situations. And so we can, you learned how to be sexual, you can learn to control that sexuality, and you can learn to make better choices according to your own code of activity within relationships or even outside of relationships.
So Brad, can you tell me what is the difference between shame and guilt?
It's a good question. In my opinion, I don't know, people might disagree. To me, guilt is feeling bad for a choice that you've made or an activity that you've done, right? So if I am talking with my hands and I accidentally smack you, I should probably feel guilty for that, right? Because I didn't mean to hit you. So guilt can be good, in my opinion, sometimes. But in many people, guilt transitions immediately into shame. We feel guilt first, and then in a matter of seconds, we transfer that to guilt or shame. Shame, in my opinion, means that I am a horrible person. Guilt means I did something bad according to my own moral code. But shame means I am bad, right? I am permanently a bad person. So words like I'm stupid, I'm awful, God can't forgive me, those are all shame-based statements. Those are not guilt-based shame statements, right? So if I am married, which I am, and I have sex outside of my marriage, which my wife would not be very happy about, then I should feel guilty about that. But does that necessarily mean that I should feel shame, right? Shame, in my opinion, is not productive. Shame is never beneficial, in my opinion, because if I am an awful person, if I am so stupid that I can't make smart choices, then that means I can't change, right? There's no hope for change. What is counseling going to do then? Because it's not going to change me into not being a horrible, awful person. And so, so guilt can be productive if we use it to move forward. Shame can never be productive because we're always looking back, right? Like, I am a horrible person. I've been horrible since birth, wow. Right? And so there's no ability to change. There's no hope with shame.
So how I guess, how do you help a client, or how do you help someone, I guess, get over that shame, or not feel that guilt or shame anymore?
That's an excellent question. I talk to my clients about this all the time. And in my opinion, the first step is to just notice shame-based statements, right? I tell them, catch yourself making these statements. And so, and I'll give them examples because they will have invariably used shame-based statements in session with me. And so I'll say, like the statement that you used where you said, God can't forgive me. That's a shame-based statement. So just notice when you make those statements. You don't have to do anything about it. Just make note of it, right? And I'll tell them, write it down in your phone, the statement. After they practice noticing for a week or two, then I'll have them start to gently argue with that statement, right? And I always use the example, like if I'm coming to the practice and I go to unlock the door and I drop my keys, my first instinct is to say, "You're so stupid," because I dropped my keys. And so then when we get to the gently arguing stage, I would say, am I really stupid? Right? And so just question. You're not yelling and screaming. You're not saying you're so stupid for thinking you're so stupid, right? Like, because that's another shame-based statement. So I just ask myself, am I really stupid, or do I just have too many things in my hands, right? Okay. Or do I need to put something down, right? So you're just starting to gently argue with yourself, and that's how you start moving away from these shame-based statements, noticing and then arguing. And then maybe replacing that with another statement like what I said is, am I really stupid, or do I just have too much in my hands, or am I too busy, or am I just not paying attention to what I'm doing, right? Do I need to pay more attention? So none of those are shame-based statements, right? So you're kind of replacing those statements with another narrative.
I like that. It kind of it reminds me of something I've spoken to clients about too, about putting your negative thoughts on trial. Like hey, what's the evidence for hey, like your example of dropping the keys, right? What's the evidence of like, oh, you're dumb? No, that's not true. You just, hey, you dropped the keys. People drop stuff all the time, right? You just pick it back up and you're good, right? And then kind of asking yourself too, is this like, okay, is this a fact, or is it like a feeling, like this thought that you're having? And also being able to say, hey, I've been able to make changes in my life before, right? And I can do it again with this particular situation.
And that's a good point, because I'll have clients write down in their phones like successes that they've done throughout the day. And I tell them it doesn't have to be like I built a rocket ship in my garage and flew to Mars. Like it could be I made my bed this morning, right? Write it down. Like if that makes you feel good, like you've accomplished something, then write it down. And then when you feel shame, when you feel worthless, then go back and read that list of things that you accomplished, that you wrote down, and that it'll make you feel better. Right? You'll be like, oh, well, if I did those things, then I can do this, right? I can accomplish this thing. It's motivating, and it's not shame-inducing. So I'll have them come up with a list of why you're awesome in your phone.
So another myth, too, that I've heard around is that sex is only for procreation. That's all it's for. You're not supposed to enjoy it. You just have to sit there and only be in the missionary position. And if you do anything outside of that, it's wrong. It's like a sin. So what do you think about that?
I have heard that too, as well, that sex is for procreation. And if you sit down with a calculator and you do the math, it actually comes out to like 0.02% of sex is for procreation. Wow. And so this is, typically like, and I was using having sex 2 times a week, which is actually somewhat low for some people. And I think I used 30 years. So having sex twice a week for 30 years, it comes out to be like 0.0002%. And that is if you have 2 children. Of course, some people have more than 2 children. Some people don't have any children. And so, like, I think that sex for procreation, we really don't want to go down that road, because otherwise we would have like 300 billion people on this planet. If every time somebody had sex, they had a baby. And I don't think really the human body can withstand that anyway. That if you had 2 babies a week for 30 years. And so, yeah. Sex is designed for pleasure. It's designed to feel good. Dolphins also have sex for pleasure, by the way. So there are some different species that have sex for pleasure and not just procreation. And we are fortunately one of those species that can have sex for enjoyment rather than just procreation.
Yeah, I think that's awesome too, and something I think that is often forgotten is that in the Bible, right? God said, "Be fruitful and multiply."
Yeah.
You know, um, yeah. So I think that's God also like instructing you to to love your partner. To make love throughout your marriage. Um, and it's okay like outside of conception to have sex and enjoy and love each other. Um,
Well, and sex really is, especially in this culture today, like sex is really a part of relationships for most people. Some people, it's not part of their relationship. But for most people, sex is a part of showing your partner that you love them and that you care about them. Because in this society, we tend to stop touching boys at around age 10 or 11. We stop hugging them, we stop wrestling with them, we stop touching them, caressing their hair or whatever, which is also coincidentally around the time that they hit puberty. And so around the time when boys hit puberty, we stop showing them love and affection physically. So that means the only love and affection that they get is through sex or masturbation. And so we have just kind of moved as a society, like all of a sudden when a boy hits double digits, like 10, we stop showing them love and affection. And so then men tend to, if you're not having sex with me, then you don't love me. Right? They equate physical touch, sexual physical touch with love. And if their partner chooses not to have sex with them, then it's an automatic thought in their head that obviously my partner does not love me anymore.
That's sad.
It is. And so then I think that when men get into porn and masturbation, it's just simply a way for them to experience physical touch, right? That they're addicted to the physical touch part.
And the same too, I guess, with multiple partners, right? It's wanting to seek that warmth, that love from someone else, even if it's with multiple people.
Yeah. Well, and so for men who choose to have sex with multiple partners, like random sexual hookups type thing, they report to me that it's the pursuit of that person. It's not necessarily the sexual act itself, that they're really pursuing that connection, that emotional connection, with that person. It's not, the reason I'm hesitating is they're not pursuing an emotional connection. They're pursuing a physical connection, right? But getting that person to talk to them, getting that person to answer their messages, that's where the thrill is for them. It's not necessarily, they report over and over to me that the sexual act is actually anticlimactic, pun intended, because that's not really what they were after. They were after the attention, they were after the affirmation, they were after the validation that I still got it and I can still make this happen.
So that connection is the important piece there.
Yes.
Wow. Brad, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to point out that we've talked about religion and sex today, and I want to point out that if religion is part of your life, if Christianity or whatever your worldview is part of your life, that we're not trying to be disrespectful to that. We're just trying to point out that believers can have good sex, like they can enjoy sex. That's not necessarily. I don't think it was designed to be necessarily inherently sinful, right? And so we just want people to behave within the parameters of their own boundaries within themselves, and we want people to live their best life that they can.
Awesome. No, thank you for that. And also just want to thank our listeners and say that I hope that this broadcast or podcast has maybe brought you towards some healing, some healing from that guilt and shame, and maybe maybe kind of help you work towards wanting to improve that area of your life. Yeah, to begin healing your, your mind, body, and soul.
Here's just a tip. We talk a lot about guilt versus shame. Guilt being feeling bad for something that you've done or a decision you've made, versus shame, taking that guilt and applying it to us personally. For example, I'm a bad friend, I'm a terrible person. While guilt can be helpful often, and it may point us into a direction to make positive changes, shame is never helpful. How can you change if you are a terrible person or a bad friend? Here are 3 tips to combat shame. Number 1, reduce shame language and avoid negative I am statements. You'd be surprised at how often we use shame terms like I am stupid or I can't do anything right. The first step in changing these behaviors is increasing your awareness of how often this is happening. Making the switch from I am bad to I did something bad can make all the difference. Number 2, practice daily affirmations. I know this may sound cheesy, but being intentional about affirming yourself and getting into the practice of noticing the good things that you're doing can be really helpful with shame. Whether it's a morning routine of telling yourself that you're awesome and that you're capable, or a nightly routine of reminding yourself of all the good things that you've done in that day, it can be extremely helpful. Number 3, reach out to a trusted person or help someone. Sometimes the shame can get the better of us to the point where it doesn't seem like anything can help. When these times hit, it is important to reach out to a trusted person that can accept and love you unconditionally. Or sometimes it can be helpful to help others, for example, volunteering or helping a friend move, etc. What shame wants us to do is to isolate and stay inside of ourselves, spiraling into that pit of shame. Both of these things can help us externalize and connect with the outside world. Liking what you're hearing so far? Feel free to give us a follow at our socials down below and get some more info on sex therapy related topics.